Hello, welcome to another new class of human physiology. In last few classes we are discussing about blood, their various blood components and function. In this class specifically we will discuss about immune mechanism of blood and lymph. So let's start with it. So what different contents will be covered for this class? We will discuss about what is antigen, and then we will see what are different organs that are associated with our immunity. We will briefly describe about different type of immune cells that are present in our body. We will see what are different form of immunity that exist, for example innate immunity, adaptive immunity, and briefly also we will discuss about antibodies and immunoglobulin. So to start with first we have to understand that what is actually immunity and why this immune system actually works in our body. So before that, let us first discuss what is antigen, right. So antigen is such a type of substance that can stimulate an immune response in our body, and it can be any foreign particle or any foreign object. It can be either living foreign object or non-living foreign object. For example, antigen example can be like bacteria, it can be any type of microbes, it can be virus, or it can be other foreign particle like dust or any other toxins or toxic substance. And whenever this type of antigens comes to our body, there are certain immune response or foreign body response that initiates. What is the main reason for it? Because our body wants to first understand if those antigens are harmful or not. If our body understand that if those antigens are not harmful, then human body may not trigger any type of reaction which is called immune reaction. But if our body determine that these antigens are harmful for our body, for example in case of any bacterial or viral infection, then there is a cascade of reaction that would initiate, that is called immune reactions, to eventually eliminate those harmful antigen from the body. So in short, antigen is mostly like a foreign object that either can be harmful or it may not. Then also briefly we have to understand that there are different type of antigen presenting cells in our body. So once the antigen comes, then certain component of our body cells has to present that antigen to our overall immune system, and few cells participate in this. For example, you can see here, for example macrophage cells, dendritic cells, B lymphocyte cells. So these are some of these antigen presenting cells that eventually present those antigen, and then it determines that if those antigens are harmful or not. So for about these cells we will further discuss in detail in consecutive slides. But before that, let us briefly discuss different type of immune organs or the organs that are associated with our immune system. So as you can see, there are some primary lymphoid organs. These are very important, like bone marrow and thymus. Bone marrow, as you know, all type of blood cells including immune cells like lymphocytes and all that are getting produced here. And in case of thymus, it is highly important because the T cells, which are one of the most important component of immune cells, that eventually get matured in case of thymus. Then there are certain secondary lymphoid organs also. For example, spleen. Of course, the main role of spleen is to filter the blood, but spleen also contains immune cells that helps to fight different type of infections. The second most important secondary lymphoid organ is lymph node. As you know, lymph nodes are very small bean shaped organ, and what is their function? They filter the lymph fluid. So we will discuss about the lymph. As you know, lymph is another parallel circulation that happens with the blood, and mostly it filters the tissue fluid or lymph fluid. But this lymph node also had different immune cells. So whenever any foreign object or antigens like bacteria and virus comes to the lymph node, the immune cells present in the lymph node participate in destruction of those antigens. Then we have another important lymphoid organs, or like another important immune organs, which is tonsil, and this is located near to our throat. It also helps to trap the pathogens that enters through the mouth. So tonsils is also one of the very initial immune related organ. So because we eat lot of food and eventually with lot of our drinks also may contain different pathogens and antigens. So tonsils can trap those antigen and start the immune cascade. Then other immune organs, for example, we have skin and mucous membranes, that like it acts as like a physical barrier. It can be like gut associated lymphoid cells. They are present mostly in the lining of the intestines, and liver also has a important role to play. For example, liver also filters the blood and removes some harmful substances. So these all are associated secondary lymphoid organ. Now let us discuss about different immune cells which are present in our body and briefly discuss their role. The first one we will discuss is about the neutrophils. So as you see, like neutrophils is generally getting synthesized or produced in the myeloid lineage in the bone marrow, and it can be stored in the bone marrow, and whenever required they can be released in the blood. So basically the synthesis along with the maturation both happen in the bone marrow, and neutrophils plays an important role to maintain the innate immunity. So this is very important, that neutrophils participates in our innate immunity. And what are their functions? They are one of the first responder. They basically phagocytoses the bacteria or any fungi or any microbes. They also release different type of enzymes, for example neutrophil extracellular traps. These enzymes can also destroy the antigen. Their lifespan is generally very short, around 1 to 2 days. The next another one of the important macrophage, and this is also like our largest immune cell. So this is like macrophage, which is like the largest immune cell of our body. Okay, they generally gets produced from the monocytes, mainly in the bone marrow, right? So they can get stored as or circulate as like monocytes, and eventually when their function is required they can migrate to the tissues and differentiate to the macrophage. So basically macrophages are a differentiated product from the monocytes, right, and where they get matured, they can mature in the different type of tissue. So whenever there is a reaction from the antigen in our body, these monocytes can get circulated to different tissue and eventually they become macrophage for further antigen presentation role, or also like macrophage can cause phagocytosis. So in terms of immunity, these macrophage play a very important role in innate immunity, as well as this macrophage can have a crucial role to bridge the gap between innate and adaptive. And what are different functions? As you see, like macrophage play an important role for phagocytosis of different antigen. They also have an important role to present the antigens to the T cells. So macrophage has a role of antigen presenting cells that present antigen to the T cell. Okay, and various like tissue cell type, like tissue specific types of macrophage also can develop. For example, like Kupffer cells in liver, microglia in CNS. Okay, to remember, macrophage is a very important immune cells in our body. So next one is dendritic cells or DC. This is also an antigen presenting cells. They get produced in our bone marrow, right? And in terms of storage, basically they can circulate in blood and reside in the tissue. In terms of maturation, it happens basically in the peripheral tissues and lymph node. Immunity, if you see, these dendritic cells play important role in both innate and adaptive immunity. So, main role of dendritic cell is as like it acts as a antigen presenting cells. So, it is very important, dendritic cells primary role is it acts as a antigen presenting cells. It also bridges the gap between the innate and adaptive immunity. It also activates like naive T cells. So, dendritic cells similar like macrophage, it is very important not only because they play important role in terms of like antigen presentation, they also bridge the gap between the innate and adaptive immunity. Then another very important immune cells is a natural killer or NK cells. The production happens in the lymphoid lineage in the bone marrow. They can be stored in blood, spleen or lymph node, and basically the maturation also happens in the bone marrow, and they have a very crucial role to play in terms of maintaining the innate immunity. Okay. What are various functions? As you can see, NK cells can kill either like virus infection cells or like tumor cells. They can recognize cells via the down regulation of MHC1 or major histocompatibility complex 1. We will discuss what is major histocompatibility complex. They also release like various type of enzymes and molecules, for example like perforin and granzymes. These all together play very crucial role to destroy this virus or tumor cell. Then eosinophils, you can see like they generally get produced in our bone marrow. They have an important role, right, to play in the innate immunity. Okay. So, eosinophils has a crucial function to basically destroy the parasites. So, these are very specific to whenever any parasitic infection happens to our body, eosinophils can be like a fast responder and kind of to kill these parasites. They also initiates allergic type of responses. So, in terms like after the initial killing of the parasites, if still some infection left, they can also generate some allergic or inflammatory response, through which other immune cells can get the sense that where the infections are present in our body and eventually get activated to work against those antigens. Then basophils also get produced in our bone marrow, right. They also play very important role in terms of our innate immunity. Basophils also very important. Why? Because they also generate this type of allergic or initial inflammatory signals, because by releasing like histamines similar to like mast cells, but this can also circulate in our blood. Then what is mast cell? Mast cell is also similar type basophils. They gets produced in the bone marrow and they can be stored in tissues. As you can see, they play a very important role in our innate cells. Same like basophils, these cells can create allergic reaction and also they can secrete histamines. So, basically basophils, mast cells, they have very important immune role to play against the parasite. Now, let us see like different type of like T lymphocytes or T cells. These are part of adaptive immune cells, and where the T cells are generally getting produced in bone marrow. They can get stored in blood and lymph node, but very importantly the bone marrow where the T cell is produced, there it does not get matured. Where it gets matured? It gets matured in thymus. So, thymus is very important to remember, because thymus is like an endocrine gland also. Along with that, in the thymus T cell maturation happen. So, what happen in the thymus? T cell maturation. And they have a very important role in terms of adaptive immunity. And different type of T cell classifications are there. For example, like there are helper T cells or CD4 positive cells. They activate the B cells and the cytotoxic T cells. T cells are also very important to secrete different type of cytokines, mainly like the pro-inflammatory cytokines like IL-2, IL-4, IFN gamma, and these cytokines can eventually act to destroy different type of antigen. There are different role of cytokine, we are not going into too much of details, but just remember that T cells has a very important crucial role to secrete cytokines. These are some sort of like protein molecules, and they can trigger like pro-inflammatory cascade or anti-inflammatory cascade based on the situation. There are different type of helper T cells like Th1, Th2, Th17, T regulatory cells, and each of these has specific functions. For example, T regulatory cells participate in immunoregulation and also it prevents autoimmune destruction. Then there can be like cytotoxic T cells or CD8 plus cells. Mainly they kill like virus infection or cancer cells, right? There are like regulatory T cells or T regulatory cells. As you remember, the T regulatory cells helps in terms of suppressing the immune response and it maintains the tolerance. Then another important T cells are present in our body, which is the memory T cells. It can recognize like previous antigens, it can help in terms of cytokine production, it also helps to act as a immune surveillance. So basically these memory T cells are very important. These memory T cells develop to act as a immune surveillance in the body, and whenever these cells store the memory of previous antigen, and if they see like those antigens are harmful to our body, they can then secrete lot of cytokines. So basically you can say also these memory T cells also act as a natural vaccines of in our body, right? So this has some sort of like a vaccine type of mechanism, although they don't produce antibodies, but they acts as a cellular vaccines in our body. Then these another classes of important lymphocytes, which are B lymphocytes. These are mainly those cells who actually can generate the antibody response against those antigen. So as you can see, B cells can get differentiated to different type of cells, for example memory B cells or plasma cells, and they are generally getting produced in bone marrow, and maturation also happens in the bone marrow. All these B lymphocytes have a very important role to play for adaptive or humoral immunity of our body, and as you know, B cells generally produce antibodies in response of those antigen, and there are several classes of antibodies like IgM, IgG, IgA, etc. These act to neutralize those antigen and remove of the infection from our body. Okay, and as I already said, these cells differentiate into either plasma cells or memory B cells. Plasma cells mostly act as a antibody factories. Okay, so plasma cells has a very important role to play in terms of as antibody factories, while memory B cells can maintain the long term immunity. So in the last slide you remember we discussed about the memory T cells. So both memory T cells and memory B cells actually work as a immune surveillance and maintaining the long term immunity of our body. So these are basically like natural vaccines, right? These cells are already present in our body, and if they fail, then we will observe like different type of symptoms, and then we have to go to doctor. But you have to understand that our human body is such a powerful machinery where the immune system is so strong, because we are always there like covered with so many microbes, so many parasites, so many pathogens, and eventually when all this immune system fails, then only we become sick. So we should be really thankful to all our immune cells, and they work continuously tirelessly to maintain our immune system and to keep us healthy. Finally, as you see, like the plasma cells that get differentiated from the B lymphocytes, right, they maintain in terms of like the adaptive immunity, and they function in terms of producing large quantities of antibodies, right. Memory B cells already we discussed, they have very important role in terms of like rapid antibody production. They produce like high affinity, highly specific antibodies, and overall they kind of work in terms of vaccinal efficiency also. Briefly, we will also discuss like the major histocompatibility complex or the MHC. So, what is basically major histocompatibility complex? Like a group of genes that encodes the protein is found on the surface of the cell. These are highly crucial for immune system ability to distinguish between the body's own cells and foreign invader. These proteins together is called the major histocompatibility complex molecules that are present like in terms of like small peptide fragments to the T cell. And what is the function of the MHC molecules? MHC molecules are essential for the adaptive immune system to function properly. They can act as also antigen presenting cells. MHC is also important during like the organ transplantation compatibility, because mismatch, if anything happens during the MHC, can lead to like organ rejection or organ failure. And there can be different classes of MHC, as you can see, like MHC class 1 and MHC class 2. So, MHC class 1, as you can see, the molecules are generally found in the surface of all the nucleated cells, and MHC class 2, in this cases the molecules are found on the antigen presenting cells. And what it does, as we already told, that it presents the peptides derived from the protein outside the cell to help a T cell. Okay. So, there is like different area where the MHC class 1 and 2s are present. So, as we said, in general, what is immunity? In cases of any infection, our human system develops a response against that infection or the antigen. That is itself is called immunity. Immunity is mainly two types. One is innate immunity, which is mostly quick and very non-specific, and there is another type of immunity which is called adaptive immunity, that is long term and very specific. So, see how this immune system perform. In cases of innate immunity, whenever there is an antigen or infection, it can be recognized by our body that what type of pathogens they are, and non-specifically different type of like those cells which are part of innate immunity. It can be like macrophage cell, it can be like other type of like neutrophils, eosinophils, and they immediately kind of phagocytosis or phagocytosize these antigens or the pathogens. But in case of adaptive immunity, whenever any infection or antigen enters to our body, they generally gets presented by the antigen presenting cells, and either way it can either activate the T cells or B cells, and either by antibody mediated mechanism or by like cytotoxic T cell mechanism or by cytokine production, our overall immune system take care of those foreign particles or the infections and destroy them. So, one more time, that innate immunity is mostly like a inborn capacity of our body to act against like the pathogen. Okay, that is why it is mostly called as natural or non-specific immunity. While you can see like there, this is like a in general very nice chart where you can see different cells who actually participate in the immunity for the innate case. So, how these cells generate, you can see initially like there are multipotential like hepatopoietic stem cells or hemocytoblasts, and by the differentiation process they can either generate like the myelate progenitor or they can also generate the lymphoid progenitor. So, from the myelate progenitor further differentiation can happen, and you can see like megakaryocytes can form, which can generate like eventually thrombocytes, or otherwise like they can form erythrocyte, mast cell or myoblast. Further myoblast can like undergo the granulopoiesis mechanism and develop different these innate immune cells, for example neutrophil, basophil, eosinophil or monocytes. Monocytes, as you remember, whenever monocytes distributes in the tissues and if in case there is an infection or the foreign body appearance, these monocytes further get differentiated and become the macrophage cell. Okay. And the lymphoid progenitor, they can further undergo differentiation and other conversion mechanism and form the natural killer cells or NK cells. So, these all different cells are, they participate to maintain the innate immune system of our body. And as we already told, in terms of adaptive or specific immunity, there are acquired immunity, and these T cells, B cells, like mostly the lymphocytes, they are part of this acquired or adaptive immunity. Either it can be active or it can be passive type. So, you can see the chart of the adaptive or specific immunity, where same way like the multipotential hematopoietic stem cells, it can undergo the differentiation and make the lymphoid progenitor cells. Then further differentiation happens, either it can form natural killer cell or it can form this type of small lymphocyte that can further go like conversion and differentiation mechanism to generate either T lymphocyte or B lymphocyte. And as you know, like from B lymphocyte or further like this type of plasma cells or memory B cells can also generate. And for T lymphocytes also there are different category, you remember, right, helper T cells, cytotoxic T cells, memory T cells. So, these different classes of T cells also can develop. So, as you see how the adaptive immunity work, if there is like any infection or virus or bacteria particle that enters to our cells or it infects our cells, then dendritic cells, which is the antigen presenting cells, or sometimes when the macrophage cells, which is the largest immune cells, they basically acts as a antigen presenting cells and they present these antigens to different type of immune cells. Okay. So, whenever these antigens come, this type of dendritic cells get activated and eventually dendritic cells carries this infection and present either to the B cells or to the T cells. When the T cells get activated, you know, like either by the performance of the cytotoxic T cells, it can immediately trigger the killing of those antigen, or it can also generate different type of cytokine action. Same way, beta cells, when they convert to plasma cells, they act to develop lot of antibodies in response of those infection and they act to neutralize those antigen. So, already we discussed what is like active immunity. So, you can see like the active immunity mostly happens like naturally. There can be like artificial active immunity also, but mostly active immunity is acquired by the synthesis of the antibodies, and that is why it is also called as like humoral immunity. So, in case of natural active immunity, this results from a subclinical or clinical infection. But what is basically like the artificial active immunity? In case of artificial active immunity, this happens by the introduction of the antigens in the body, basically in form of like vaccine. Okay. And then there can be passive immunity, which are not present kind of in our body, basically like from mother to the daughter or son. The passive immunity can be passed, or during COVID you have heard of like plasma based therapy also. So, we can also kind of supplement another person with the active plasma from a healthy person, and the plasma may carry like various antibody. So, in this way that immunity can be passed to the one person to another person. This is called also artificial passive immunity. And what are basic difference of active immunity and passive immunity? We can see like active immunity is generally produced in the host immune system, but in case of the passive immunity, it is basically passed from one person to another. This active immunity can be induced by either of any infection or immunogen, but passive immunity already is present in another healthy person's body that can be transfused to another disease patient. Mostly this type of active immunity is effective only after a certain time or lag period, but passive immunity, these are highly kind of it can respond in a very quick manner. So, it kind of shows an immediate action. Immunological memory can be present in case of active immunity, but there is no immunological memory that can be passed from a passive immunity. Okay. So, these are different differences between active and passive, you can go through further. And lastly, little bit we will touch base on the antibody. So, as we said, like the B lymphocyte cells develop this antibody which have very specific structure. For example, you can see this IgG type of structure. These are also can be called as immunoglobulin, right. So, an IgG is like this is like a Y shaped molecule, right. So, you can see this is like a Y shaped molecule made of mostly 4 polypeptide chain. There is like 2 heavy chain and then 2 light chain, right. So, you can see like there are light chains and heavy chain. So, basically 2 heavy chain and 2 light chain, these are all are polypeptide chains, and they are basically attached together or held together by these disulfide bonds. Okay, and there are different classes of antibodies also we discussed. For example, like IgA, that has a very crucial role to play in localized defense mechanism, like IgD, these are also involved in recognition of antigen by B lymphocytes. Then IgE is involved in allergic reaction. IgG is very crucial, it is responsible for this complement fixation, and many of these neutralization reaction of virus, bacteria, all this happens by production of IgG. IgM is also responsible for complement fixation, and some cases IgM can also deliver from mother to a baby. Okay, so these are different classes of antibody. Overall, the role is still more or less same, but there are certain specifications, it can vary for all these different antibodies. Eventually, the antibody's role is to maintain our adaptive immunity, and whenever there is like a memory presented to them from the antigens, they will develop this antibody which are like immunoglobulins, and eventually those immunoglobulins or antibody will bind with the antigen and create the destruction mechanism or neutralize them. So, I hope you enjoyed the immune system class. Please see some of the questions and try to kind of answer what are differences between innate and adaptive immunity, how does like immune memory work, why the autoimmune disease develop, right, and also how the allergies arise. So, hopefully you like the class. You may refer like different books or web contents. If you have further questions, please drop us those questions via email, or also you can discuss with us during the live sessions. Hopefully you are enjoying the human physiology class. Thank you for attending another new class. Hopefully we will meet very soon with another new class of human physiology with you. Thank you very much.